Well, happy Friday, everyone. Welcome to the 12th in the series of our Pandemic Survival Guide for Residential Contractors. Thank you all for joining us. We have made it to the end of June. Paul, David, and I were just talking about kind of where things are unfolding here in the country. So I guess we've made it this far, but still uncertain where we go from here. For those of you that don't know us, my name is Ed Earl. I'm coming to you from San Diego, where I run a construction project management company, as well as being a business coach for residential contractors with these two gentlemen as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Paul. You can introduce yourself, Paul.
Well, I'm Paul Sanneman, and I'm coming to you from Corona-free Finland. It's basically over here. It's sort of interesting. But now it's also, 9 o'clock at night. So I've been working from 5 at night to midnight, which is fine. And the sun doesn't go down to midnight, which is sort of cool. So I got 2 days. I got my regular stay at home with the kids and play between, 8 and 5, and then 5 to midnight I can work on a whole other day because the sun doesn't go down. It's sort of cool. Anyway, so I'm not relating to all this Corona stuff, so I'm sorry, guys.
And I am. Go ahead, Ed.
Well, I was just going to clarify for those of you that don't know, Paul doesn't live in Finland all the time, right? So he's usually in Hawaii, but he's visiting Finland.
I've got a house in Palm Springs and Hawaii and here, but here seems to be a good place to be in the summer, so that's why I'm in Finland.
And I'm speaking from Boulder, Colorado. Nice weather, great time of year. Work with Paul and Ed, again, the business coaching, some consulting, and man, things are changing. So we were just talking about some conditions around the country. So boy, we are not in the, we're not through this yet. So go ahead, Ed. Let's go ahead and pick it up.
Yeah. So, that's the purpose of this webinar. As you can tell, everything changes still. Here we are 3+ months into this pandemic, and things are still changing on a weekly basis. We have a lot of updates just since our last webinar 2 weeks ago, changes in the PPP program and the EIDL program, and changes in how the country is working. And so as successful residential contractors, you all need to be able to know and how to respond to that. And so that's the purpose of this webinar, is to give you the latest and greatest and up-to-date information. So I'm going to start us off, as I usually do, with a little bit of humor. I'm going to go back to the signs that we talked about on the last webinar. They were all church signs. This time they're, for the most part, theater signs, except for this one. This one I love. This is Denny's, always open, but we're closed. So now some of these, where this is changing, so we can kind of laugh at this, but let's hope we don't see these signs again sometime soon. I like this one from the State Theater. Now playing, no close encounters of any kind. And here's another one. Cinema closed until real life doesn't feel like a movie. Stay safe and be kind.
That's for sure.
And then this one, I like this one from a strip bar. So it says, closed until April 30th, right? So, all right. Well, as we usually do, we check in on the country here. So the good news is that as of June 12th, the last red state went off the map. And the red state are the states where the construction was not allowed. So as of now, construction is now allowed nationwide. And it is interesting to see that the gray states, which are the ones that didn't apply any restrictions, include some of the states that now, unfortunately, are seeing this increases in the rate of infections. Arkansas, Utah, Oklahoma. So so that's interesting. But at least we are all back to work. So that's the good news. So let's start, as we usually do, with a little show of hands. How many of you have received a PPP money in the last 2 weeks? Curious. I'm not going to guess that we're going to see too many hands, because probably most of you that have been following us on the webinar are ahead of the game and have already applied for your PPP amounts, right? Yep, I don't see any hands going up.
None.
Okay,
no.
Well, for those of you that have already applied and wish that you could get more, guess what? there was a new bill that was just introduced last week that would actually allow small businesses to get a second PPP loan. So this happened on June 18th. So it was actually introduced to both the Senate and the House, and it's called the Prioritized Paycheck Protection Program, the P4 program. They must have some government staffer that comes up with these funny
P4.
acronyms, right?
It's sounding really bad. TPP and P4 and P for you, P for me. It's like, come on.
Right, exactly. So again, this hasn't been signed into law yet. I just checked again last night, and it still hasn't been put in front of President Trump. But I think there's a very good chance that it's going to pass. And if it does, this is the way it's written. In order to apply for a second PPP loan, you have to have less than 100 employees. Should be pretty good for probably most of the people that are on this. You have to have used up or on pace to use up your first PPP loan. Well, that makes sense. And now this is the interesting one. You can show a 50% loss in revenue due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And you can show that you need the money for eligible payroll and non-payroll costs. The key point here is they don't clarify how to calculate the 50% loss. You know, is it 50% of a loss compared to last year or last quarter or since this started? I mean, there's not really even an agreement on when it started. And some of the government documents are saying, you know, it was in February. So that's one thing that I cannot find any clarity on. So I don't know how you prove that 50% loss, but I would assume that they kind of make this stuff up as they go along, but I assume they'll clarify this as they get further on.
This is going to be harder to get than the first one. The first one, we didn't have to prove any loss at all, right? You just applied for it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So this is going to be a little harder than the first one because you actually have had to have some way, somehow, have had business go down. And which the good news for most of our clients is business hasn't really gone down, right, Ed?
No.
It's been pretty much flat.
Right. Exactly. So another thing
I do have one client who's,
go ahead, Paul.
I have one client who's a caterer who business has dropped a lot, the catering business, but other, restaurants. But I'm not sure this is going to apply to the contractor who's still doing well.
Right. Exactly. So, and the other thing is that they're targeting the smaller companies. You still would have the discretion of doing the loan forgiveness after 8 weeks or 24 weeks. The key thing, and one of the articles I read, which is important to note, is that there's still more than $513 billion. That's more than $500 billion available in the PPP loans. So, there was this big surge in the first round and it sold out in no time. And in the second round, people kind of started not being so interested because of the forgiveness rules. But so there's still more than $100 billion in funding is still available. So for those that can take advantage, there is definitely plenty of money. And for those of you that didn't apply and now are thinking you want to, there is still that $100 billion left. Okay, so the other big news that happened was also last week on June 17th, the SBA released an easy forgiveness application form, which, if you recall, the old one was 11 pages. This new one is only 3 pages. Thank God. And it is so much simpler. So, however, of course, there's limitations on this as well. So the first one is if you're self-employed or you have no employees, you can use the 3-page form, which, again, probably doesn't apply to anyone on this webinar. But the second is if you did not reduce the salaries or the wages of your employees by more than 25%, and you did not reduce the number of hours of your employees. So that's a little bit trickier now. You didn't reduce the number of hours and you only reduced their salaries by 25% or less. The third one, and again, this is kind of a nebulous area, you experienced reductions in business activity as a result of health directives. Well, I think everyone in the country did, so that's hard to prove. But you did not reduce the salaries or wages of your employees by more than 25%. This probably covers many of the people here on this webinar. So if you were affected, everyone was, and you didn't reduce your salaries or wages by more than 25%, then you can use this new 3-page form. So not only is it only 3 pages, it also requires a lot less documentation. So, And you still have the option of whether you want to do the 8-week or the 24-week, which you might think everyone's going to want to do the 24, but that's not necessarily the case. I'm going to cover that in a minute. So this is the new form. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. I want to zoom up on the bottom part because it's basically these 8 lines at the bottom. And so you basically fill out your payroll cost, any mortgage interest you paid, your business rent, and your business utility payments. You add those 4 up, okay, and you put that right here. Then you put your PPP amount here, and then this is an interesting little math exercise, which I thought was interesting. You take your payroll cost and divide it by 0.6. So for those of you that passed high school math, you know that if you divide something by a fraction, it actually makes it bigger. This is a tricky and clever way of basically adjusting your forgiveness amount based on the percentage that was applied towards payroll. Remember that you have to apply 60% of the loan proceeds towards payroll. And if you apply less than 60%, then your loan amount will go down. But it goes down by a percentage. I know that some of our participants in the past were arguing that it was an all or nothing. In other words, you had to use 60% of the money on payroll or you didn't get any of it forgiven. But that isn't the case. With this new calculation based on this fractional math here, it will work as a percentage. And then the last line is just you take the lesser of those 3 amounts, which is another kind of somewhat clever way of being able to just basically determine if you spent more than 60% on payroll costs, it's going to be more than your payroll amount. So by taking the lesser of those 3, it's actually giving you hopefully the lesser of the 3 will be your PPP amount. So
can I pose a question? Can I pose a question from Elena?
Yes, you can.
All right. So if employees are paid a wage plus commission when they bring the job to a company, would that 25% reduction only apply to the wage?
That's a good question. That's a really good question because the problem here, Elena, is as you can tell from this application, there's really no calculations here. I mean, you're putting in your payroll costs. So I would say, look, if the commissions are subject to payroll taxes, then it's part of your payroll taxes. So as long as it's not a 1099 commission, I would say yes, that it would count because your payroll costs would include your commissions. If your commissions are 1099, then I don't think they'll be included in the payroll costs. So, all right.
Now, Ed, you can't end up with a negative number. Basically, you'll end up with, if you spend all the money or most of it on payroll, then you show you spent on payroll and it'll all be accounted for, right?
Correct. Right. Exactly right. So, yeah, there's no way you'll end up with a negative number, and hopefully you'll end up with the amount of the loan amount. But it could be less than that if you've spent less than the amount of the total loan, which would be line 5.
What if it's more than that?
If it's more, then you just get the loan amount forgiven. But if you pay more than that in payroll costs, they're not going to give you any additional amount, and that's why it's the lesser of those 3 amounts. So if your payroll amount is higher than your loan amount, you still only get the lesser of the 2, which is the loan.
Right. Okay. Loan amount. Okay.
All right. Okay. So let me cover another interesting fact, which is I've read this good article that Paul passed along to me. Some people may actually not want to do the 24-week forgiveness period. You may want to keep it at 8 weeks. There are certain advantages to keeping it at 8 weeks. So let me kind of go through them. The first one maybe is a little bit obvious, which is the loan will be forgiven faster if you've got that 8-week period. So that may be one reason to do it. Another is it may be easier for you to keep your staff for those 8 weeks instead of over the 24 weeks. Some people didn't think about that, but if you extend your forgiveness period to 24 weeks, now you have to be, staffed during that full 24-week period. Another reason to stay with the 8-week would be that, they keep changing the rules all the time, and they aren't necessarily always in the borrower's advantage. So by doing the 8-week period, you can get locked into whatever the current rules are. And then the last reason to keep it at 8 weeks is, let's say you have other lines of credit or other debt you could actually be negatively impacted on that, your ability to qualify for other debt, because they're going to still see that forgiveness, the PPP program, as a loan and that it wasn't forgiven. So those are the 4 considerations for the 8-week. The reasons to do the 24-week is obviously the obvious one, that more of the loan amount can be spent on the payroll taxes. The second one is that there's more certainty as to what the law will allow and doesn't allow in a few months from now, right? We'll have a much better idea of how the forgiveness program is working now than we did 2 to 3 weeks ago, and probably more clarification will happen. So the longer you can wait, the better idea you'll have of how that forgiveness is done. Another one, this is kind of a clever idea, is you can actually use it as a negotiating tool. So let's say that you have other debtors or other creditors, and they're trying to get you to pay money back. You can say, well, I've got this big PPP loan, and it's out there, and I don't have the ability to pay back these other loans because I have all this other debt. Even though hopefully you won't have to pay it back, you can kind of use that as a negotiating tool. And then the last reason to keep it at the 24 weeks is that you have more time to speak with your advisors, to create a plan, to kind of figure out how you're going to use the money. And so that's the reasons for that. Okay, so let's move on now to the EIDL loan program. So once again, let's see a show of hands. How many of you, since our last webinar 2 weeks ago, have received approval notification from the EIDL? Curious to see. Okay, here come the hands. Exactly, right? Okay. So that's what's really been happening now, is that the EIDL programs, they really are pushing people now trying to get this money distributed. Again, as I said before, there's still $100 billion left in this funding amount. So here are 2 notices that Paul and I received in the last week. The first one was a Dear Paul letter that Paul got, which was, we're reaching out to you in regards to your request for EIDL. We were unable to successfully verify and validate all of your information in order to process your advance. So again, they're trying to get people that have submitted it to make sure that they've got all of their information, because they really want to try to get rid of this money. For me, if you recall, what I did was I've got all the way to the point of the loan docs. And then once I realized that it was a collateralized loan, I kind of got cold feet and I decided to stop. And so I've been getting these every couple of days, which is that records indicate that you have not taken the next steps. So they keep telling me, Ed, come on, apply for the money. We want to give it to you. But I just haven't decided if I want to do that yet. So, and for those others of you that are on the fence, this is the summary that we've done before, but just to kind of give you the difference between the two. The obvious difference really is that the PPP is forgivable while the EIDL isn't. But another key point too that we've learned is that the EIDL requires collateral, which was not the case and is not the case with the PPP loan. Also, the interest rate in terms is not as good with the EIDL. It's a 3.75% interest rate compared to a 1% interest rate with the PPP. But again, the PPP is only a short-term, hopefully mostly forgivable, while the EIDL can be a 30-year loan. Let me cover one other loan, which actually we discovered this week. It was part of the original CARES Act, but it's called a Section 7A loan. So this is a loan that's been a part of the SBA for years and years, but the CARES Act made it a little bit more attractive to people. So this SBA 7A loan is really more of an investment loan. It's not for operating capital like with the PPP or the EIDL. This one can actually be used for purchasing equipment or real estate. You can even take this loan to buy another company. So, and again, this is something that's always been available with the SBA. But with the CARES Act, the key thing is that if you close one of these loans before September 27th, you get forgiveness of the first 6 months of both principal and interest and the loan fees. So that's a real advantage. So for those of you that are looking for other funding sources, this is something that you might want to look at. In order to qualify, you have to have less than 500 employees, less than 7.5 million. Again, that should probably cover all of us here. You can borrow up to $5 million. But again, the loan does require collateral, and it's a full due diligence process like a typical SBA loan. You're going to want financial documentation and all of these kinds of things. And you also have to, in these quotes here, have to describe how it impacted the business and how they're planning to succeed by getting this loan, how that's going to help you to make it through COVID. So
yeah, we sort of skipped over it. I have a question. In the easy, the new easy PPP, there's virtually no documentation, right? You sign a bunch of things. There's a whole bunch of initials on that one page, but you don't actually have to submit any actually, what do you call it, substantiating documentation like payroll records or anything. Like there's zero, right?
So I don't know, Paul. That's a good question. My bank, the Bank of Southern California, sent me an email talking about that 3-page form, but they told me that they're still trying to clarify whether they're going to require documentation or not. So again, remember that you don't submit that form directly to the SBA, you're submitting it to your bank. So the bank is still interpreting this. So I think it's kind of on a case-by-case basis. And my bank has said that they may still ask for some information, some documentation. So
we've got a good comment from Matt. You mentioned the little bit more liberal terms on the 7A loan.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, so Matt has an existing 7A loan and the SBA automatically took over the payments. And I'm assuming that's for that 6-month period.
Wow.
They just stepped in and took them over. Yeah.
Wow. That's great. Interesting. Okay. So for those of you that didn't know about it, that may be something that you want to check on. So, all right. So we're going to jump in a little bit here and talk for a few minutes about some marketing approaches. Something we talked about on the last webinar was the fact that in pretty much all of our markets they're declining, right? Construction is decreasing as a whole. But the point here is that doesn't matter so much, because if you can make a small increase in your market share, you can more than compensate for any decline that's occurring in your local construction market. So we're going to cover 4 approaches. I don't think we're going to get through all 4 today, but I at least want to try to cover the first couple. Yes, Paul.
Now, I would like to, can you show who of the attendees here have actually experienced at least a 25% decrease in market, like your business went down because of COVID 25%? Because that hasn't been our experience. All our clients are doing great. I want to know if this group, there's a bunch of where the actual business did go down like 25% or more.
We've got Elena, we've got Matt, Miriam, Derek, Diane are all saying their business did go down 25%.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. So it looks like about maybe 5 out of 22 or something like that.
Yeah, about 20%. It's
not huge, but 20%. Okay.
Yeah. Elaine is asking for what time frame. Well, I would say, for the last 3 months compared to the same 3 months of 2019. So, all right. Well, so whether your business has gone down or not, these are marketing approaches that will apply regardless. The first one is maybe a little bit obvious, but I think it's important to restate it, which is that you need to re-engage with your past clients, right? And because what we're finding with many of our clients now is that they're finding that their customers, maybe they did a remodel a year or 2 ago, but now that they've been home for 3 months, they're going, God, we enjoy our kitchen so much. That's been so great. But, we don't have a home office, or we need something else done within the house. And so, again, if you already have an existing relationship with them, circle back with them and have a discussion. We've had some of our clients have sent out emails or had conversations and said, hey, we just want to check in with you. How's it going? How is this, working from home going for you? And are there any improvements that you'd like to make? And if so, we're willing to offer a complimentary design session. We'd be happy to sit down with you and design any kinds of improvements that you want. Another thing that obviously is a great source from your previous clients as well is to ask for referrals. again, if maybe your clients aren't looking to make any improvements as a result of these stay-at-home orders, they may have friends or family that are. Yes, Paul.
Now, I have a couple of suggestions in asking for referrals. I have something called the complete referral cycle. The gist of it is, in most cases, if you may have a 20% shot of asking somebody referrals, that person has a 20% shot of asking somebody else, and that person has a 20% shot of calling you back. So if you just only do it occasionally and you let the cycle work and you don't take full control of it, you have like a 0.05% chance of referrals working. On the other hand, when you ask for referrals, you ask, as many clients as possible, and you get the name of the person that they're referring to, and you call that person. So you take complete responsibility for getting a hold of that person. It's a huge difference. And we've just started doing with clients because we've noticed that, oh my God, it's like this huge source of business we've overlooked, that everybody knows, whatever it is, 100, 200 people, 500 people. This is way easier because now we've all got cell phones as opposed to Rolodexes in the old days. So they're all listed. And if you're interested, we have an exercise we can send to you, which basically shows you how to identify those people. But asking for referrals is a huge source of business that most of us are ignoring. But keep in mind, when you ask for it, you have to make sure that you take responsibility to call that person. You can't let them talk to the person, have the person call you, because the chances are it won't work.
Great point. Yep. Okay, so I'm going to wait on the other 3 marketing tips. We're going to kind of leave you hanging here. We're going to cover some more of those on the next one. To be honest, really what's happened here is that we have these ready, but the more important and relevant information for all of you are these continual changes in the PPP and the EIDL and all the disaster loan relief information. So we always want to make sure that we get that information out to you, but we always want to throw you a couple of extra nuggets if we can along the way. So I'm going to leave you with this. Speaking of the extra nuggets, this is actually from our first webinar slide back in March, but again, I think it bears repeating because it is so important. Stay informed, but don't watch the news. I think that the news is just as sensationalized and stress-inducing here at the end of June as it was back in March. There's still so much uncertainty and unknowns of what's going on, and we have all of the civil unrest and protest information now added on to the pandemic. So be careful with your consumption of the news. Second is to connect with your peers. Connect with the rest of the people in your industries, whether it's through your local NARI chapter or your Builder 20 group, or reach out to your local colleagues as well as your subcontractors, and really share information with them as well. Be optimistic about the long term, but focus on short-term solutions. Again, things changing as quickly as they are, you really have to be constantly changing your short-term strategies. And that is very, very important. So with that, I think we've answered all of the questions. If you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We respond to every email, every phone call that we receive. Here is all of our individual personal phone numbers as well as our direct emails. And if you have any questions at all, please feel free to reach out to us. We will be back again 2 weeks from today for our next update, where we will give you any and all updates that are the most relevant related to the disaster loan programs. And we'll also continue with discussing marketing strategies to help you increase your market share in a declining market. So with that, I want to say thank you all for joining us, and we will look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks on July 10th.
Enjoy your July 4th holiday, whatever that looks like.
Yeah, right. Have fun.
All right. Take care, everyone. See you then.